Hi there guys, got a video here for you today on the BSA R12, and in this one we're going to be doing a final overview of the rifle. What we'll be doing is going through my experience with the rifle, some of the modifications I've made to it, as well as giving you my final thoughts on the rifle itself. Now we'll mention that the rifle that you see here is heavily modified, but you can see the full journey of this rifle here on YouTube. With that said, what I want to do first is go over my initial impressions of the rifle as well as the out-of-the-box performance. Now I will say my initial impressions of the rifle were very good. The stock looks and feels fantastic. It is a little short for me personally, but I have that trouble with a lot of rifles, so I won't hold it against the R12. And to be honest with you, even though it's a little short, it still is a very comfortable rifle to shoot. And the monoblock fitted to the R12 looks very nice indeed. A definite upgrade over the older R10 models, which were made up of a number of sub-assemblies all bolted together. And the addition of the side lever on this rifle gives it a much more modern feel as opposed to the older bolt-action rifles. You can still get this rifle in a bolt action, although if I'm honest, if you have the option, it's always better to go for a side lever. The thing that I was a little worried about with this rifle were the magazines. I had read a number of people having trouble with the magazines. What was happening is they was loading a pellet in this side, and as they put it into the rifle, cock the rifle back, the pellet was falling out the back and going back into the action. And I'm happy to say that on this particular magazine I had no problems with the pellet retention. All the pellets stayed in there and I never had a problem with a pellet dropping back into the action. As far as I can tell, the fix was to put a slightly larger O-ring in the magazine itself, which helped grip the pellets better. However, I don't know the full fix. But whatever the case, the magazines on this rifle functioned as they should. And putting the rifle over the chronograph, you can tell that the new redesigned regulator is working exactly as it should. The rifle was very consistent out the box. And although the power was slightly low, I wasn't too worried as the feet per second deviation was very small. So the initial impressions of this rifle were very good. It's a nice looking rifle, it's a nice feeling rifle, and everything worked as it should straight out the box. The last thing to do was to take it down range and test it for accuracy. And unfortunately, that's where we discovered a couple problems. And with a target set out on the back wall at 50 yards in Pete's airgun farm, it was clear that the rifle just wasn't that accurate. Now we'll say that it wasn't terrible, although there was clearly something amiss somewhere. At 50 yards we was getting roughly a 25 to 30mm group edge to edge, which again wasn't terrible, but I would expect better out of a premium rifle. And before you ask, we tried every commercially available pellet through this rifle. Every single H&N, every single JSB, and pretty much every other brand of pellets that you can think of, we tried through the rifle. Having a closer look at the rifle, it became very obvious that there were two manufacturing errors with the barrel. Firstly, when looking down the muzzle end of the barrel, I could see that the rifling was missing from the last 5mm of the barrel. It looked like the rifling had been machined out somehow, although the inside of the barrel was blued, so it was obviously done in the manufacturing process. Secondly, when having a look at the breech end of the barrel, it became clear that the lead had been cut a little too deep. This meant, as the pellet probe pushed the pellet into the barrel, it wasn't being fed into the rifling correctly. It was being left about 2 or 3mm too shy, so the pellet was able to float up and down a small amount within the breech itself. Now at this point I do want to mention that I did contact the shop that I bought the rifle from, which was the Crawley Surplus store, and they were fantastic. They offered me a number of options, so number one, I could have given the rifle back for a full 100% refund, or they would have exchanged the rifle then and there on the spot. They did have exactly the same rifle still on the shelf, so if I had wanted to, I could have given this one back and gotten a new one. And the third option they offered me was to send the rifle back to BSA to be fixed. Now I obviously chose to keep the rifle and fix it myself, however I do want to give a very big shout out to the Crawley Surplus store for being straight with me and trying to help. And the last thing I'll mention in regards to this is that I just got unlucky with this rifle. Most will be fine straight out the box, they won't have any issues whatsoever, and I'm not going to let the poor accuracy of this rifle sway my opinion on it. With that said, the next thing we'll do is discuss some of the modifications I've made to the rifle. And obviously my first job was to fix the barrel. To do this I concentrated on one end at a time, starting off with the muzzle end, and what I ended up doing was cutting the last 5mm off the end of the barrel and then re-crowning it. This did shorten the 1/2" UNF considerably, but it did not remove the choke. Doing this didn't completely fix the accuracy, although it did make it significantly better. The second job was to make a slightly longer pellet probe to push the pellets a little further into the end of the barrel. So I just copied most of the original probe's dimensions, although I did make a slight alteration in that my probe is a pin probe rather than a hollow probe. And this combined with the work done to the muzzle transformed the rifle, but you'll see that in the shooting footage shortly. Once the barrel was fixed, I could concentrate on some of the more aesthetic options of the rifle, and the first thing I wanted to do is add the carbon fibre bottle. What I ended up doing was making a new stainless steel bottle valve to fit the new carbon fibre bottle. The valve itself will fit both the 480cc and the 300cc bottle, although I decided to keep the 300cc bottle on the rifle as I thought it fit better with the stock. Now, shortly after making my own bottle valve, BSA did release their own one, so if you do want to get a carbon fibre bottle for your R12, you can buy the bottle and the valve from any BSA stockist. And the bottle combined with the slightly shorter shroud makes the rifle a nice little compact package. Although I will say, as I keep getting asked, that the bottle won't fit on the R10. The R10 stock at the front here isn't milled out enough, so the bottleneck won't go inside of the stock. The next modification was the Shroud Mod Combo. Now the shroud itself was fairly simple, as it just simply screws onto the existing 1/2" UNF on the barrel, has a little bit of expansion room in the front here, roughly 25mm, and then has a 1/2" UNF male thread on the end. The moderator itself is slightly more complex, as I wanted to keep the overall length of the rifle down. What I ended up doing was boring out the back of the moderator so that it slides over the shroud a little. So if we take a look at the shroud here and the moderator, if this just butted up against the end of the shroud, you can see that it makes the overall length quite long. However, as we've bored the back out, it slides over the shroud and then screws on a little further down. The overall length for the Shroud and Mod Combo is about 40cm, and that's about 50mm shorter than the original one, with the added bonus of this shroud being working, whereas the one fitted to the standard R12 is just a dummy shroud. And I'm happy to say, even though this is 50mm shorter than the original, it is still slightly quieter. The next thing I done was made a number of small modifications to the internals of the rifle to make the rifle a little more efficient. Now with the standard 280cc metal bottle on the rifle, we was getting around 130 shots, and that was from a 200 bar fill. With the slightly larger 300cc carbon fibre bottle and a number of small improvements made to the block, we're now getting around 170 shots per 200 bar fill. Now I didn't go mad with the internal modifications, I just kept things nice and simple. So what I ended up doing was fitting a shorter, stiffer hammer spring from Apex airguns, as well as removing the valve return spring spacer. I also made a few PTFE guides for the hammer spring and the hammer, as well as making a small valve plug, which again just slightly improved the efficiency of the rifle. There's definitely more shots to get out of the R12. I did have a look at making a new valve for this rifle, as I think the original one is a little inefficient in its design. However, I decided to leave it be for this particular rifle, as I was quite happy with 170 shots out of a nice compact package. And if I needed more shots for any reason, I could always replace the 300cc bottle with a 481. With that all said, let's get this rifle taken down range and I'll show you what we can do with it. And here we are all set up in Pete's airgun farm in the 50-yard range. We're going to be setting our target on the back wall at 50 yards, and the targets being an A4 piece of paper with a number of 25mm circles printed on it. We're going to be doing 5 shot groups using JSB short pellets, and all of these groups here were done using a magazine. I will mention that the rifle is a little better when single shot loading, however, as this is a little tricky to do, I stuck with the magazines. And if I'm honest with you, this is a hunting rifle primarily, so you're going to be using the magazines, although I have seen a couple quite nice 3D printed single shot loaders, so possibly I should have got one of those. But anyway, as you can see here, the groups are looking nice and tight. With the shorter, stiffer hammer spring fitted to the rifle, the action does feel nice and snappy, and overall I'm quite happy with how this rifle's turned out. We did get one or two flyers, but I'm using unweighed, unsalted pellets straight through a magazine, bringing the target in a little closer to 35 yards. You can see how the groups tighten up. I don't normally shoot at 35 yards, but it's always nice to see how the rifle performs at different ranges. But as you can see there, pretty much one whole group's at 35 yards. With that all said, the last thing to do was put the rifle over the chronograph and show off the consistency of the rifle. The rifle was very consistent straight out the box, however making some small improvements to the internals of the rifle did limit the spread even more. Right then, so hopefully from that little bit of shooting footage you can see how well this little rifle's turned out. I really am quite happy with it. However, the question that we normally ask at the end of these videos is, would I buy another one? And for the BSA R12, the answer to that is unfortunately maybe. Now I do honestly like the rifle, although I do have a number of problems with it. So firstly, the rifle itself just isn't really my style, and when comparing it to some other admittedly more expensive brands, the rifle does feel a little dated. I don't really like the fact that this rifle came from the factory with a metal bottle. I think as this is BSA's flagship rifle, it would have been nice to see a carbon fibre bottle fitted from the factory. Another thing I don't like about this rifle is the number of anti-tampers present in the block. I do perfectly understand the reason why manufacturers need to use anti-tampers on their rifles, but the BSA R12 does go a little overboard in this area in my opinion. And finally, some of the components in the block are designed a little strangely. The one that stands out to me is the design of the hammer. So you have the hammer weight and the striking face, the hammer shuttle, and then the cocking pin which runs through the centre of it. The cocking pin is a weird design as it requires a grub screw to go in through the back and secure the cocking pin in place. The problem with this design is that the position of the cocking pin up and down is quite critical for the trigger adjustment, and pretty much every time you take the hammer out of the rifle, you have to completely readjust the trigger. And on this rifle, if you get the cocking pin a little too far down or a little too far up, it can be a pain to get the trigger to actually work. Another strange design choice is the 13mm dovetail on the top. The industry standard is 11mm, or better yet, pick rail. However, on this rifle they chose to stick with the 13mm dovetail, which for me personally is a little bit of a shame. Most of these rifles are going to be used as hunting rifles, and it would have been nice to see a pick rail on the top there from factory. Most of the night vision stuff is pick rail, and in my opinion at least, pick rail is just a nicer system overall. I know some people will disagree with that, but these are just my personal opinions. And when weighing up both the positive and negative aspects of the rifle, for me personally, I wouldn't probably buy a new rifle. However, if a clean second-hand rifle came up at a good price, I don't think there's anything that would stop me buying one. However, that's just my personal opinion. But with that all said, that's pretty much going to do it for this one, guys. So, thanks for watching, I hope it's been useful, and we'll see you in the next one.